It's a rare occasion when we get a look in the beehives in January. So this time of year, you're always wondering what's going on in my beehive. Well, the weather's cooperated with enough today that we can have a look, and we've got some good things to learn by doing so. 50 degrees or a little better in Spring City, Utah today. It's January the 5th, so that's kind of unusual weather. What I'm doing today is I'm checking on some bees. I don't recommend getting in bees in the middle of the winter time, but when the weather does this, it's a good idea to make sure you know what's going on in the beehive so you can successfully get them through the winter. So I know there's one colony here that is a little bit light. They don't quite have enough honey, and I would feel better if I could get a little bit more in there. I looked at them a few days ago, and if I don't do something, they're not going to make it through the winter. They've got a limited amount of space in here. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 frames that are partially filled with honey, and they've got some brood going on, so they're consuming more stores than they've got to make it through till March or April. So I'm going to put some more comb in here. Now the trouble is I've got this in a medium depth box. So the only comb, the only honey that I have right now is in deep supers. So I'm going to have to improvise. We'll see how we can get some honey in there without trouble. So I've got this frame of honey is on a middle bar frame, so this should be easy enough to cut it out because it's foundationless. Okay, I'll reuse that frame later, and I can leave this attached to the middle bars. Here's a frame that's foundationless. No middle bars in it, it's just a deep frame foundationless, and there's honey in the corners, nothing really in the middle. I'll just do this. I make that about the right depth of a medium box or a medium frame. 6 and something inches, 6 1/4 or 1/8 or something. That'll sit right in there like that without a frame. I'm not going to try to feed these bees right now. If I were to feed them granulated sugar, it would help. They'd pick some of that up, but honey's best. I wouldn't try to feed them syrup right now because I anticipate not having any fly days after this for a while. I don't know, this year's been unusual. We may have some more cleansing flight days, some warmer days, but honey's the best. If you have honey, leave them honey. Bees can't pick up the syrup when it's too cold, so we'll do it the old-fashioned way. Make sure that I'm not feeding a colony that's doomed anyway because they don't have a queen or a brood. Now, I looked in here a little while ago, a few days ago, and they had brood, so I assume everything's going okay. There's brood there. There's a good patch of brood right there. There's another patch of brood right there on that one frame. So for that much brood this time of year, first week in January, in a medium box, they're going to starve to death. All right, so at least 2 frames of brood, partial frames of brood, no honey to speak of. This hive would have surely died in the next month or so without intervention. I face these bees going south mostly. I like to face the bees, if I line them up like this for the winter, in a south by southwest direction. So my thinking is that in the morning they get the sunlight, but it's coldest in the morning, warmest in the afternoon in the middle of the winter. So if they're a little bit further west in direction, they'll get roughly the same amount of light and warmth in the morning as they do in the afternoon. Some years it's not necessary to wrap, but how do you know? So you wrap them anyway. There would be those that argue that it's never necessary to wrap, and there'd be some people that say that you should always wrap if you live in a temperate zone. So we may have some people that are watching information that I have to give that are from a more a less temperate climate than I live in. So you adjust your situation to where you live. So I've used a full sheet of styrofoam. Didn't have to cut it down at all. It works just right for 3 pallets that contain 4 colonies each. Okay, here we go. Let's look in and see. I'm curious to see what kind of brood these have going for them right now, this time of year. These bees are mostly from my feral bee project. These are ones we caught down in southern Utah. Curiosity is going to get the best of me here. I would look at that cluster right there and say, hey, they look good, and just close it and get out of there. But I kind of want to see how much brood is in there this time of year. So here we go. Honey in the corners. I don't see any eggs in the middle. Let me try one more frame over. I don't see any brood there, but they do look good. No brood. There's the queen bee. Let me shine the light down in there and see if I can see if she's laying eggs. I don't see any eggs. Okay, so that's January the 5th. No brooding there. Enough bees to get through the winter. Usually if bees are doing well this time of year, they're going to make it. We've had some temperatures down in single digits overnight, and so far we've got some colonies that are going to make it. We have some pretty small clusters. So all of these are still alive as of January the 5th. That's a pretty small cluster of bees to think that they might make it, but you never know. That one looks like it may have some brood coming up. Let's look in there. I usually don't wrap my bees, so when I have really small clusters like this, I'm going to try and give them a little bit of an advantage. Let's wrap them and see if we can't get them through. Little bit of brood right there. So how do you know in the winter when it's safe to look into a beehive? We'll kind of go by the temperature. The bees will tell you if they're out flying, then you're probably safe to pop the lid for just a few minutes, right? Don't leave it open for too long. That's a good brood pattern, only it's small, but it looks good. I'm going to put it back together and stop bugging them. It's especially important this time of year to put things back the way you had it because the bees can't really adjust much. So we'll put these frames back. We can see where the bridge comb and brace comb kind of matches up. That'll help me keep my frames in the right order. These bees are feral colonies. So far, they're really nice. I'm working without gloves. As soon as you say something like that, you get stung. But I wanted to point this out because we have a lot of hobbyist customers that buy these bees. And even though they're wild feral stock, they're pretty gentle. There's a lot of honey in that one. This one looks like it has a lot of bees on. Let's see. See if there's any brood. No. No. I'm worried about this one. There's just not enough bees in there to keep going. But obviously with the cold weather in the evenings, you'd think these bees would have been done for. But we still got a queen. She's one I've marked there. It's got a little yellow dot on her. So keep going. Maybe we'll make it. That's not even one frame of bees. But let's continue to hope. I put those back in a different order. This one's full of honey. That one's not anything on it. The bees aren't clustered, so they can move over. I think that's a good move. I think. Here's another really small cluster. We usually don't even put any effort into these. They're just doomed, but these are some valuable queens, so I want to give them every chance I possibly can to survive. I can see chalk brood in here and the bees that haven't emerged. I'm going to take another second to look for the queen. So if the queen's in here, I'll leave them. If she's not, maybe I'll think about moving them. If I wanted to combine them, but didn't want to spread chalk brood by putting a frame in here, I could shake all these bees off, put them in this colony. Here again, beekeeper interference that's causing the industry so much trouble. These bees have survived on their own for so long because they've had no beekeeper. Maybe I'll just stay out of it. Here's an interesting thing right here. You'll see this propolis they put in front of the upper entrance. So when the bees come in, they go around. When they go out, they have to go around that little blockade there. Another small cluster. Let's see what we got going. Okay, the bees are most of the way down on the frame here. Half that frame's full. So I think these bees have got a good chance of getting through the winter. And I do see eggs. So no capped over brood, no larvae, but she is starting to lay eggs. They're on a frame with plenty of honey. I think they stand a chance. That one's pretty heavy. Oh, whoops, doopsers. Try not to do that. Especially try not to do it when you don't have your veil on. I don't see any brood. I don't see any eggs. And I might have seen the queen if I hadn't dropped it. Wiggle the little bit, wiggle the lid a little bit when you put it down so you don't smash bees. Okay, there's that row. I think that quick peek in there under the lid to see how many bees was in there is enough. I'm not going to get in there anymore. Let's start down at this end. There's a queen bee. I don't see any eggs. I want to move some honey a little bit closer to that cluster. That doesn't have any honey in it. If they get cold, they're not going to be able to move over to where the honey is. So on a warmer winter like this, not as big a deal, but maybe I'll move some honey a little closer to them. Well, total time in there was, I don't know, 5 minutes or something. That's not enough to hurt them when the temperature is up as high as it is. So, especially since there's no brood. There's the queen bee right there. I marked her too. She's got a tiny little bit of yellow on her. Most of it's worn off, but she's there. I've got a bee in my bonnet. I'm going to let her out. Be right back. Usually when a bee gets in her hat, she just wants to get out. In conclusion to the video you just watched, let's give you a list of the things that you learned that will be helpful in your beekeeping experience. So we learned the practicality of the same size of box and same size of frame. So I'm cutting out some comb out of a deep to make it fit into a medium. Right, it works the other way around. You can put a medium in a deep, but in an emergency situation, you shouldn't have to cut honey out of a comb to feed the bees in the wintertime. So, but that's what you do if you're having an emergency. The best way to solve that problem would be to begin with use all the same size boxes, all the same size frames. The bees don't care if they're in a medium box or a deep box, it's personal preference. You make it easier for the beekeeper to help the bees by using all the same size standardized equipment. Another thing we learned was overwintering or wrapping. If I knew that it was going to be such a mild winter, I wouldn't even bother to wrap anyway. Right? So how do I know when I need to wrap or not? I don't, so I just wrapped, and as it turns out, they were plenty warm during the winter anyway. We learned the value of marking a queen bee. So the queen bee in one of the colonies we looked in was present. I found her, but I couldn't see any eggs. So it's easier to look for eggs and to look for brood and to look for larvae than it is to find the queen. But because I've marked the queen, I could find her easily, and that would prevent me from shaking that queen and those bees into another colony. And then I would lose one of the queens. They'd fight it out. And also I wouldn't have a separate colony going into springtime. So we learned the value of marking the queen bee. Can I check on bees in January? Well, usually I wouldn't recommend it, but how do I know if it's safe to open up a beehive in the wintertime? Right? Are the bees flying? If the bees are flying, they've broke up their cluster. If the cluster's broken up, it's warm enough. All right, I wouldn't recommend spending a lot of time in there snooping around. But you can take a few minutes, pop the lid, evaluate the colony, put it back together the same way, right? We don't want a frame of brood on the outside now. Keep the brood right in the very center if it's cold weather. What not to feed in winter? All right, so I fed them honey that's already been capped. It's been dried out. It's not fermented. It's not open. Open cells of honey in the wintertime will absorb moisture and can ferment. So I fed them capped over honey in the wintertime, because they didn't have enough going into winter. Luckily, the weather gave me a break. I could look in a colony in January and assess what's going on and feed them, put some additional honey in there. You can use a candy board. You don't want to use syrup. The syrup will be too cold for the bees to pick up. They won't pick up cold syrup. We get a question all the time in the spring when we're having a beginning beekeeping class, how do I get my bees through the winter? They used to annoy me a lot. Well, now it's a legitimate question, because getting bees successfully through the winter begins in the springtime. We want to make sure that the bees get off to a really good start in order for them to complete a whole year successfully. We learned that it's necessary to evaluate a queen bee and if the colony is queen right or not before you go to a lot of effort to try to save them. If there's no queen in there, there wouldn't be any reason to feed the bees. There wouldn't be any reason to take those bees and give them a boost from another colony if there's no queen. All right, so there's remedies for queenlessness, but not in January. I don't know of any. You could order a bee out of Hawaii, a queen bee out of Hawaii in January, but the chances of it turning out good for you are slim if it's not queen right in the wintertime. So let's evaluate if they've got a queen before we take any more effort to save a colony. It's ideal to get your feeding done in the fall because the chances that you'll be able to fix that later are less. So we want to have our bees up to weight and get enough feed in there that's capped over the ripe honey, or if we have to feed them sugar syrup, we want them to pick up that syrup and dry it out and cap it over before the end of October, at least in my climate. If you live in California or Florida, that's different. If you live in Hawaii, you know, find a beekeeper video from Hawaii. I probably can't help you much. I've never kept bees there. Some of you are probably watching me open up a beehive with snow on the ground and bees that are wrapped in the middle of winter, and you just heard me say it's January 5th. Are you crazy? What are you doing? Everybody knows you can't open up a colony in a climate like mine in January. You're going to kill your bees. Well, the bees are flying, so I know the cluster's broken up. It's not even jacket weather. It's that warm, right? So if you do it right, if you know how long to be in a hive and not in cold weather, then you'll get away with taking a quick peek under the lid in the middle of wintertime. Okay, we learned how not to spread chalk brood, all right? So I was going to combine one colony that looked queenless with another one, but there was some chalk brood in there. I don't want to take a diseased colony, a frame with disease on it, and combine it into a healthy one. I've just spread the disease, right? So chalk brood's not a terrible disease, but I would have been better off if I could combine the bees, but not the bee equipment, into another colony. I chose a spot for the wintering of the bees where I know they'll be in the sun, and I know there won't be a whole lot of snow on the ground. They're not in a corner or on the north side in the shade, right? So if the bees do come out of the hive, they're not going to cool off too fast by landing in the snow. If you have to get into a beehive, which we frequently do when we're sending the bees to California, that happens in January. So we have to take all the lids off the hive, evaluate the hive in the middle of winter, and it's best to do that in a place and at a time when there's not snow on the ground. A bee lands on the snow, it'll cool its body temperature down right away, and it won't be able to return to the hive. So if it's a warm day, the ground is dry, then the bee can take air, it can get airborne and come back to the hive, or at least crawl back into the hive. So we learned from that. Pick a spot for the overwintering your bees, anticipating that there may be a reason, hopefully not, but there may be a reason why you're going to need to look in that beehive when it's wet, cold, rainy, snowy weather. If the sun hits the entrance of the beehive in the morning, there'll be some thermal gain, helps the bees warm up. In the wintertime, the sunlight and the warmth of the day is going to be in the afternoon. So we have bees facing west and we have bees facing east. If I've lined them up like I did, that's the best compromise. Wear your veil. Most of this video I don't have my veil on. I recommend wearing your veil. Usually you're not going to get stung in the face, but sometimes you will. It's just not worth it. Put your hat on. And by the way, we also are selling bee veils. Check out our video on bee veils. We learned something about upper entrance. If I'm wrapping the bees, I've got my foam on top of the hives, and then I've got black plastic over the top of that, and that comes around the top of the hive, covering the lid and the upper entrance. So my upper entrance does me no good anyway. And we also saw propolis that is put over the upper entrance. The bees restricted that. They don't need that upper entrance. Let's take a clue from the bees, okay? Sometimes, most often, if your bees are inclined to gather propolis, which they should be, they'll just cover up that upper entrance. Okay, that's about what we learned in this video.